Now, let's go back, and I think I agree with what the professor just said. Now, let me take you back during 8 years of George Bush, when this man was called everything but a child of God. He's Hitler. He's a Nazi. He's a warmonger. He's crazy. He's insane. He's stupid. He's a fool. You know, there was a book written that speculated on assassinating President Bush. Not by some fringe guy. Some guy wrote a novel. It was one of the best-selling novels in, like 4 years ago that speculated on assassination. So, American politics has always been rough and tumble. You go back to 1830s, man, you had people saying crazy, and, you're a professor of history, you know this stuff. I mean, it's always been there. So this stuff about all of a sudden we've become this incredibly uncivil place, and I would argue that it's gotten a bit crass. And I think it's gotten, a bit crasser since the days of Ronald Reagan, because I was in a good, I was a Marxist, when Ronald Reagan was president. And I remember the kind of things I said about Ronald Reagan, right? And it got weird under Clinton. Remember all the stuff that was being said about Bill Clinton? He'd killed people, and all kind of bizarre thing was being said by the right against Bill Clinton. So, and I think part of that is, we had the advent of 24-hour news channels trying to fill stuff up. You've got, I think there has been, some new things that have allowed that tendency to be more visible. You had to go out and find it before. Now you click on your TV, you just sit back and click through the channels. You got MSNBC, CNN, Fox News, all these people trying to fill up their news holes, and often it's like the if it bleeds, it leads kind of syndrome that's chasing this stuff. So I don't think there's a lot new here, and I don't think there's anything that's more extreme going on with the right that's went on for 8 years under George Bush. The Code Pink types that would follow this man to the ends of the earth to call him Hitler. So I don't think there's anything particularly new here that we're seeing with some of the fringe stuff on the right here.
Well, however, I think the media and pundits have created an environment whereby after the election of Barack Obama and you started to see commentary that suggested that, we've reached this post-racial place whereby we've elected an African-American president and the end of racial politics now, we're in a post-racial setting. I think the media created an environment that allowed us to be hoodwinked by simply suggesting that because there was an election of an African-American president, we've now resolved the color barrier that W.E.B. Du Bois said would be the problem of the 20th century. We've solved that. We've dealt with the color line. I think that was problematic because the scholarly community didn't follow suit. The scholarly community has enough empirical data to suggest that when we look at white racial attitudes, there are some white racial attitudes that play out in interesting ways when we ask certain survey questions. By the same token, when we look at black racial attitudes. So clearly, we're not in a post-racial era, climate, epoch. But for the pundits to lead us to believe that, and for this to transpire, it just creates an opportunity for revolving news stories.
Well, I think there was a lot of euphoria around, the election of Barack Obama, and I think a lot of that was, see, all right, I've already laid my cards on the table. We all know I'm a conservative. I didn't vote for Barack Obama, but there's something terribly significant about this nation. How many years? I mean, in my lifetime, we've come from days when my relatives had to drive across the country with greasy bags of chicken because they couldn't stop anywhere, and finding trees to use as restrooms, and segregated lunch counters and miscegenation laws, and all this stuff was all within my lifetime. So within a few short generations, we've come from that historical reality, and the civil rights movement, to the nation doing what? Electing a black man as president? So there's something incredibly significant about that. And I think that combined with other indicators, and this could be a very long discussion about, studies and surveys of racial attitudes and what that indicates. But there's certainly a lot to indicate that there's a lot that's new going on with racial attitudes. And Barack Obama, I think, indicates much of that. Now, whether or not we're in a post-racial period is something that people could fight and fuss about for a long time. But what I think has happened here is that the election of Barack Obama conflicted with a lot of people whose analysis of America was, it's still a racist nation, it will always be a racist nation, but yet had to come with an explanation by why a sizable number of white American voters voted for a black man, right? So I think that you know, a lot of the dissension we're seeing now is people reacting to the claim that we're living in a post-racial period, and then you know, interpreting almost every attack on Barack Obama as, because he is a black man, as being racial. So one can say, well, anybody attacked Barack Obama, it's got racial roots. I mean, you want to engage in that kind of speculation. So it's been an interesting year in terms of trying to dissemble all this stuff and figure out what it all in fact means. But I just find it interesting that the racial angle, so soon after one of the most positive things that ever happened in this country in terms of racial dynamics, the election, people voting for a black man to be the leader, basically the free world, not just the United States, it's some symbolism of a black man as president traveling all around the country, you know, I think is a powerful one, and certainly has to say something about where this country is post-2008 in terms of that election may have meant.
Okay. Do you ever think this country is ever going to stop being so cynical, I guess? I guess there's always going to be people who feel that this country is always going to be racist and everything. But do you think we can ever truly get past the racial divide that's in this country?
Well, first of all, I think that, you know, we need to understand, you know, first and foremost that, you know, this country does have a racial history that needs to be acknowledged, and we need to be aware of that. And once we acknowledge and we're aware of the country's, racial history, we can come to grips and to terms with the fact that, part of the early voting criteria in this country had to do with a couple of categories, right? You had to be a landowner, and of course, you had to be a white male landowner, right? So if part of the early voting criteria suggested, that you had to be you had to possess these characteristics, and of course, that speaks to this whole notion of a race-related, a race-infused history around the notion of politics and development of the republic. Now, fast forward, what does that essentially mean? Well, we know from anthropologists, from sociologists, and et cetera, that race is a social construct, right? So, race being socially constructed, we see now that, not only do the games we play around race have virtually no scientific, biological, or meaning, it's a meaning that's infused in what? Infused in a hierarchy. And this hierarchy, subjugates one group and elevates the other group. So how do we get around it? Well, one of the things we need to do to get around it is we need to educate ourselves around these issues, and part of that education is to acknowledge the issue itself. So, we can't do what I call, ostrich theory, stick our head in the sand and, suggest that race and the state of race relations or negative race relations does not exist when we have clearly evidence that it does. We need to, engage it. We need to address the pink elephant in the room.
Okay. Thank you for watching On Point. My name is Matt Johnson. We never got to Acorn or anything.
Oh, yeah.
Into that.
See, this is just the latest. These guys were out collecting registered voters, and I guess they were getting paid based on how many they could register, and a lot of fraudulent stuff turned up in terms of how they were performing those duties.
And that typically happens when any organization offers a bounty for registration cards. If any organization was involved, not just Acorn.
Yeah.
Now, there were some Acorn offices who had better quality control.
Exactly.